The candle sputtered oddly, flickering like it couldn't decide between celebration and warning. Then came the scream, not from a mouth, but from the fire. It roared, cracked, and behind the birthday balloons and laughter, my suitcase was burning, not by accident. He stood near it, holding a crumpled matchbook, smirking like he'd just won a war no one knew had started. That was my grandson, and that was the moment he crossed a line he didn't even understand. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening from in the comments. My name is Wallace. I'm 73 years old, and this is what really happened. They said I was getting forgetful. That's how it always begins, doesn't it? With a laugh, a soft murmur, a sideways glance. She's just tired. He's getting old. Let him nap. The phrases float around like casual smoke, small dismissals dressed as kindness. They don't sound sharp when first spoken, but they slice when they add up. Because memory isn't the same as relevance. And I hadn't lost anything, except maybe patience. What they didn't realize is that in silence, we store things. Details, dates, names, faces, and in my case, evidence. But let's not skip. That suitcase, the one now reduced to ash and buckled metal near my hydrangeas, it wasn't just full of clothes or photos. It held the chapters of my life no one cared to read. Until they realized I'd written their names into the margins. The party was held at my daughter's house, a glossy white suburban palace with soft jazz whispering down from hidden ceiling speakers. The kind of house that smelled like money had been recently ironed. Hors d'oeuvres lined the counters, appetizers with names longer than my pension statement, plated on trays no one dared touch without a napkin. I was king for a day, they said, but I'd seen funerals with more sincerity. "Grandpa!" my grandson shouted, arms wide like some child actor rehearsing joy. "Come see what we got you." His smile was wide, too wide. I'd known him since birth, and still, something about his grin that day didn't belong. It was too measured, like a salesman showing teeth, not a grandson showing love. I smiled back, polite, tight-lipped. He was 23, all hair gel, ambition, and empty compliments. He didn't hug me, didn't even brush my shoulder. He just motioned toward the backyard like I was being summoned to a viewing. And that's what it was, a viewing. The backyard was over-decorated, gold and white balloons tangled with ribbons, a long table stacked with unopened gifts wrapped in paper more expensive than the gifts themselves. A banner stretched wide across the hedges, swaying gently in the wind. 73 and still sharp. The exclamation point hung like mockery. I stood beneath it like a punchline waiting for applause. And then I saw it. The suitcase, not tucked away in a corner, not honored, displayed, placed atop a pedestal of crates and draped in string lights like it was part of the decor. My suitcase. It was olive green once. Time had darkened it to the color of old moss. Patches of fabric stitched over its skin like scars, each one bearing the ink of another country. Morocco, Osaka, Prague. The places I had carried myself when my children were still small, still calling me Dad without rolling their eyes. The handle frayed, the zipper stubborn, forever catching on the last tooth, refusing to close without a coaxing tug. It had been with me longer than my children had known their own addresses, and now it was centerpiece comedy. I moved toward it, slowly, steadily. My shoes sank a little into the grass, as though the earth itself resisted me from getting closer. That's when I saw the matches. And the smirk. "Thought we'd give you a real show, Pops." His voice was slick, pitched just high enough for the group to hear. A few heads turned, the laughter followed. Not cruel, Worse. Pitying. The kind of laugh people use when they want to pretend they're in on a harmless joke, when they don't want to be accused of taking life too seriously. "Oh, come on, it's just a bit of fun," someone called out from the patio. "Nothing important in there, right?" another voice added, uncertain, as if asking permission to keep laughing. I didn't respond, because if I had, I'd have said something I couldn't take back. So I watched, as the flame licked the corner, teasing first, then devouring. As the zipper teeth curled under heat, like they were screaming, each one bending like pain given shape. I watched as the flame reached paper. The photos. Faces frozen in sepia. Soldiers I'd trained with, friends I'd lost, moments no one else remembered. The passport pages. Stamps from borders crossed in youth when the world felt wide and possible. The letters. From a woman named Layla, a name no one in that backyard had ever heard, because they had never asked. Her handwriting folded, aged, but still breathing on the page, now curling, blackening, surrendering to a fire started by a boy who thought history could be erased for applause. Later, when the last balloon sagged and the wine glasses had emptied, my daughter pulled me aside. Her voice trembled, not from guilt, but from trying to keep peace. "Dad, it was just a prank. He didn't mean—" I raised a hand, calm, controlled. "I know." She blinked. "Then please don't be upset. He's trying to test boundaries," I said, each word clean as glass. "And now he's learned where mine are." She looked confused, maybe worried. The kind of worry reserved for when parents stop explaining and start deciding. But I was already thinking ahead. Because the thing about memories, you can't kill them with fire, if they were never meant to live in paper. Back in my own home, I opened a drawer. The wood creaked, familiar. It had creaked that way for 20 years, always sticking on the left side, as though reluctant to reveal its contents. Inside, a small black USB stick waited. Labeled in my handwriting, LW Archive, Legacy Copy. Everything that burned was already digitized. Every photo, every letter, every page, backed up, encrypted, time-stamped, and shared to 3 recipients, each with different instructions. Because fire can burn paper, but it cannot burn truth that's already multiplied. But that was only the beginning. The next morning, while my daughter cleared empty glasses and folded tablecloths, a manila envelope appeared at her doorstep. No stamp, no return name. Delivered by hand. Inside, a single handwritten note. The ink pressed firm, deliberate. To be opened during dessert. My grandson wouldn't know it yet, but the real gift at my birthday was mine to give, and his to regret. The scent of burnt cake frosting still lingered in the air, sugar and smoke clashing like 2 memories that didn't belong in the same room. Sweetness and ruin, celebration and ash. The kind of contrast you can taste at the back of your throat long after the plates are cleared. But underneath it, something else crept in. A faint, drifting note. Perfume. Not mine, not even my daughter's. No, this was older, rarer. A fragrance that didn't belong at that polished suburban table, yet filled it all the same. It came from the envelope. From the moment my daughter unsealed it with trembling fingers, I could smell the trace. Jasmine and sandalwood. The kind Layla used to wear when she wanted to haunt a room long after she left. It wasn't just a letter. It was a scent, a memory, a message. And across the table my grandson's smile faltered. Dessert had just been served. Crystal glasses balanced on silver coasters. Chocolate mousse, rich, dark, whipped to perfection, spooned into cups that caught the chandelier light like captured stars. Spoons clinked. Too polite, too careful, as though sound itself had been rehearsed. My grandson sat at the head of the table now, self-proclaimed host, shoulders rolled back, chin lifted, his voice weaving through stories about angel investors and seed funding. He painted himself as a prince of startups, a young king waiting for a crown that he believed would be handed down simply because of his bloodline. His cousins chuckled. Not because they believed him, but because laughter was safer than silence. The champagne flutes beside them were empty, tipped at angles that betrayed more consumption than class. I watched him raise his spoon, slow, deliberate, like he was already living in a portrait that would hang above a mantel someday. Then the envelope arrived, not by my hand, but from Helen, the woman who had once babysat him, Helen, whose hands had rocked him when he was colicky, Helen, who had sat in my kitchen 25 years ago, humming lullabies off-key while feeding him mashed bananas. She had retired, moved to Arizona, sent postcards once in a while of cacti and red rocks, but she had a way of showing up when things turned glossy, when the truth risked being painted over. And here she was. "Wallace asked me to deliver this," she said softly. Her voice was plain, steady, but it cut sharper than champagne bubbles ever could. She placed the envelope beside his mousse glass and stepped back. He laughed. Of course he laughed. Laughed like someone who had already forgotten the suitcase. Laughed like someone immune to consequence. Like life itself was staged for his amusement, until his fingers touched the envelope. The laughter thinned. His nails scraped the wax seal, the sound faint but grating, like teeth on porcelain. Inside, the paper unfolded with a crispness that felt heavier than it should. The letter was mine, my handwriting, but not the shaky loops they were used to seeing on birthday cards or hastily signed checks. This script was clean, sharp, a hand steady with intent, sharpened by patience, almost printed. I had written it months ago. One quiet evening, while the family group chat buzzed on my tablet, while I watched him joke with his cousins about inheritance, about the house, about how old Wallace wouldn't need much longer anyway. That was when the ink had flowed. To my grandson, whose ambition is only rivaled by his arrogance. He froze. His lips stopped moving. The spoon slipped from his hand and landed against the crystal rim with a sound too loud for such a small motion. He didn't finish reading it aloud, but silence did the work for him. Because silence is never empty. It fills with eyes, with speculation, with dread. My daughter leaned over, curious, her brow furrowed. She read just a few lines. Her hand flew to her mouth as though the words had teeth. My son-in-law leaned in. His fingers tugged the paper away. His eyes scanned faster, slower, then froze. His chest rose once, twice, shallow breaths, and then the moment I had waited for. He stood. The chair legs scraped wood like an accusation. "You have to be joking," he muttered, flipping through the pages, his voice cracked between disbelief and fear. "You're transferring what?" Every head turned, every gaze landed on me. Not with love, not even anger, but confusion. The kind of confusion that comes when people realize the ground beneath them has shifted and they hadn't even felt the quake. Because what they didn't know was simple. The deed had already changed hands. The house, theirs in name only. The trust, amended. The power of attorney, revoked. Every change notarized, filed, with receipt numbers and lawyer initials inked in blue, not black. All of it detailed in the packet now sitting beside the mousse. A packet dressed as dessert. I rose, slowly, carefully. Not rushing, not gloating. Simply steady. Like the old man they thought I was. Manageable, predictable, harmless. Then I walked toward the table. Their silence cracked with every footstep. I reached out, lifted the final sheet from the stack. Not legal text, not amendment. A photo, black and white, torn at the edges. My grandson, age 7, hair messy, smile wide, holding the same suitcase he had burned, except back then it had held Legos and half a peanut butter sandwich. Back then it was a treasure chest. Not a prop, not a weapon. I placed the photo on top of the documents. Legacies, I said quietly, but firmly enough that each syllable carried, are earned, not assumed. He didn't speak, but his fists clenched against the linen. His jaw tightened. The mousse melted in forgotten glasses. The room had no music now, only forks scraping nervously against porcelain, an orchestra of avoidance. My daughter tried to soften it, tried to find some middle ground between fire and water. Dad, surely this can be. No. One word, sharp as a gavel. No apology attached. No cushion. Just finality. Her lips pressed shut. Her eyes flicked to her husband, to her son, then back to me. But I had already turned. I walked into the living room, picked up the remote, clicked the television on. The flat screen glowed. Not with sitcom reruns, not with golf highlights, but with my email inbox. Projected wirelessly, row after row of outgoing emails, each one carrying attachments, JPEGs, PDFs, scanned documents, audio recordings, and every subject line began the same way. For safekeeping, WH. A whisper traveled across the room. Then a gasp. Then the shuffle of someone standing too quickly, their chair legs grinding against the hardwood. Is this blackmail? My son-in-law hissed, his face pale, his grip on the envelope tighter than before. No, I replied, my voice even, calm. I still hadn't turned toward them. This is the archive. You know, the one you thought he destroyed. My thumb tapped the remote. An email opened, the screen filled with an image, a notarized amendment to the family trust, signed, stamped, certified. The colors on the document glowed too bright on the TV, the seals glinting like they'd been polished with light. My grandson's mouth opened slightly, but nothing came out. Then it closed. That was better. Silence served me more than words ever could. Let them digest it. Let them choke on the mousse if they had to. Because this wasn't about fire anymore. It wasn't about what he had burned. It was about what he could never touch. I had built my legacy brick by brick. With patience. With silence. Every page, every file, every hidden copy carefully stacked until it became something unshakable. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence is preparation. Silence is power. And tonight, they were finally learning that lesson. The keyboard clicks were steady, slow, deliberate. Each one sharp as a metronome, cutting through the silence of my study. Not frantic, not hurried, just measured strokes, like the ticking of an old clock whose hands never lied. The kind of sound that reminds you, history is written one key at a time. And tonight, I wasn't rewriting. I was restoring. There's no need to rush restoration. Each line typed with care, each attachment linked with precision. My fingers hovered above the final key. A breath, a pause, a moment that felt heavier than the rest. Then, enter. The files went out, to inboxes that would not delete them, to recipients who owed me nothing, to people who could never be bought. And in that single keystroke, I had spoken louder than the fire that had roared at my birthday. They thought burning the suitcase would silence me, but fire can only consume paper. It cannot consume truth. This was me speaking louder than I ever had. The day after the party, the house was quieter than usual. No apology calls. No late night, it was just a misunderstanding texts. Not a single voice daring to say, "We went too far." And I hadn't expected one. Because when people think they've destroyed you, they don't call to apologize. They scramble. I could feel it, like static in the air. They were scrambling now, pacing in kitchens, whispering over phones, trying to contain a fire they couldn't see, but already felt warming the soles of their feet. You don't burn someone's legacy and expect the ashes to lie still, especially not when those ashes had already been scanned, tagged, indexed, and scheduled. Each document had been given its own code, each story its own timestamp. I hadn't done it alone. I had partnered with a former student of mine, a young man who had once barely passed his history class, but years later had become a cybersecurity consultant. He owed me nothing. That's why I trusted him. We built it together, a digital vault. We called it Legacy Base. Simple name, heavy purpose, secure, encrypted, self-sustaining. Every photo, every scanned letter, every journal entry once tucked into that olive green suitcase now lived inside it. Not just stored, protected, and triggered. If anything ever happened to me, an accident, or one of those convenient falls old men seem to take, the full contents would be published. Automatically. Publicly. 7 days later. Unstoppable. They could try to hide the match. But I had already built the fireproof room. On Tuesday morning, my grandson showed up. No warning, no text, just him. That same leather jacket, that same restless energy. But the smirk was gone. He stood on my porch like a stray dog left out too long in the rain, damp, restless, eyes darting. "Grandpa, can we talk?" His voice was softer now, unstable. The kind of voice a child uses when they know they've been caught, but don't yet know how deep the trouble goes. I opened the door. Slowly, but I didn't invite him in. I let the silence fill the doorway. He shifted. His hand twitched at his side. His eyes flicked to the threshold, waiting for me to move. I didn't. Silence can say more than anger ever could. Finally, he stepped back. His throat tightened as he spoke. "I didn't think you'd actually go through with it." My eyebrow lifted, just enough. "Go through with what?" His words stumbled. The deed transfer, the trust revocation, the digital thing. You really sent it all?" I gave him one nod, firm, final. His chest caved slightly. "I thought you just threatened to." And there it was, the word, threaten. "That's your problem," I said. My voice steady, but edged with truth. "You thought this was a threat. It was never a threat. It was a record." His lips parted, closed, his face folded into something between shame and panic. For a moment, I thought he might cry, or punch the wall, or both. Instead, he stood there, breathing too quickly, hands curling, uncurling. I leaned against the doorframe, felt the breeze carry my words toward him. "You lit that fire thinking it would end something, but all it did was mark the beginning." He swallowed, tried again, with excuses he'd probably rehearsed in the mirror. "You've always kept those things hidden. We didn't even know what was in that suitcase." I stared at him. One word. "Exactly." His jaw clenched. He had no reply, and I closed the door. The following day, my lawyer called. His tone was brisk, almost clinical, but underneath it, there was a respect he didn't bother to hide. "Mr. Harrow, I'm calling to confirm the third and final notarization has gone through." I didn't ask which one. I already knew. The scholarship fund. In Layla's name. The estate that had once been earmarked for my grandson's business ventures, those hollow startup dreams he paraded in front of his cousins, was no longer his to dream about. It had been redirected, legally, irrevocably, to students with no family name to stand on, to young people who carried nothing but grit and hope. Because that's what legacy should be. Not a throne, a platform. Later that week, I sat at my desk and scrolled. The first recipient had posted publicly. A girl, maybe 19. Eyes tired, but bright. A scholarship announcement in her hands. She didn't know me, would never know me, but her caption froze me in place. Someone believed my story mattered. Those 5 words landed heavier than any birthday toast, heavier than champagne, heavier than applause. Because they weren't about bloodline, they were about belief. And that was the kind of weight worth carrying. Back in my study, the glow of my monitor lit the room in quiet blue. I opened the legacy-based dashboard. A list of names stared back at me. Authorized users, people who could access the vault. My lawyer, the scholarship coordinator. My oldest friend from the Navy. Helen, the babysitter, now the overseer. And me, each login, each IP address, each download, tracked, recorded, immutable. And my grandson's name? Not on the list. Not now. Not ever again. The last tab waited like an unfinished sentence. Letters unsent. I clicked. Dozens of drafts. Words I had written in the quiet hours, when reflection had nowhere else to go. One in particular stared back at me. A message I wrote the night after the fire. Never meant to be mailed. But still. I read it aloud to myself. You thought I was hoarding the past, but I was building a mirror. And now you'll see yourself in it. You always had a match in hand. But you forgot, I designed the walls. The words lingered, not bitter, not vengeful, just true. And truth doesn't need to be sent. It just needs to exist. The sound came from the fork hitting porcelain. Too sharp, too sudden. It cut through the air like a blade across glass. It wasn't the soft clink of silverware that usually floats unnoticed around a Sunday brunch table. No, this was harder, louder, final. It echoed across the room like a judge's gavel, and for a moment, no one moved. The clatter rolled into silence, not the calm kind, not the comfortable kind where people sip their coffee and smile politely at one another. This was the silence that blooms before a storm. The kind that makes your skin prickle, as if the air itself has decided to hold its breath. He had just read the card, the one I had slipped beneath his napkin. I'd done it quietly, unnoticed, during the toast, while the others laughed, while glasses lifted, while mimosa refills shimmered in the sunlight, while plates of eggs and sausages were praised as perfect. I had made my move. Not with fire, not with shouting, but with paper. Paper is sharper than flames if you know where to place it. And as he opened that folded card, his grip tightened. His spoon trembled in his fingers. Because what I wrote wasn't just a message, it was an execution. Effective immediately, all financial authority under the estate has been terminated. See attachment. One single printed line. Cold. Director. Without excess. I didn't need to say more, because beside the card was an envelope. Inside it, a printed document, stamped, signed, filed 2 weeks ago, just before my birthday. It was real, and he knew it. It hit him harder than the fire ever hit me. Let's rewind. After the suitcase burned, after the cake, after the digital archive began dripping into the world like water from a cracked pipe, unstoppable, uncontainable. I made one more change, one final twist of the knife. Not public, not noisy, not yet, but binding, legal, lethal. I had revoked his financial access, every joint account, every co-signature, every contingent beneficiary clause in my estate. Gone, no warning, no announcement, just silence and a timestamp. He had no idea. Not until now. He thought the documents at dessert were dramatic. He thought Legacy Base was symbolic. He thought all of it was theater. But this was different. This was the floor falling out from under him. "You can't do this," he whispered. His voice cracked, too thin to carry weight. And the words weren't even for me. They were for his mother, my daughter. She sat 2 seats over, pale, frozen. She hadn't known either. Her hand hovered over her coffee cup but never touched it. Her lips parted, but no words came. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. But I wasn't a stranger. I was the man they'd underestimated. Again. I leaned forward, quiet, calm. "The signature on that page isn't just mine," I said, my voice steady, measured. "It's the court's, dated, certified, and notarized by the same office that handled your student loan deferment, if I recall." Her eyes widened, his shoulders slumped. The paper shook slightly in his hands. Not from anger anymore, from fear, from cracks forming in the armor he'd wrapped himself in. He stared at me, not defiant, just broken in places he didn't want anyone to see. It wasn't about revenge, not really. It was about the message. You don't set fire to a man's past and expect the future to remain yours. After brunch, I stepped away. I left them at the table, plates half full, eggs congealing, laughter gone. I sat alone in the garden. The sky was soft, a pale stretch of blue between thin white clouds. Birds shifted in the branches overhead. Their songs weren't cheerful, not really. More like background music to reflection. I let the breeze comb through my sweater, felt it against my skin like an old friend. And in that quiet, my phone buzzed. Not a call, a notification, a transaction alert. One of the final transfers had cleared. The beneficiary, a small publishing house, a modest place, nothing flashy. But now, thanks to that transfer, they had just received enough funding to digitize a memoir series. Elderly veterans, untold love stories, forgotten letters. They would live again. Layla's letters were already boxed, labeled, and shipped. And mine. The ones they never knew about. The ones no one had asked to hear. On their way, too. By Monday, my grandson had reached out to the family lawyer. Begged, pleaded, tried to find a loophole. He wanted to contest the estate changes. But the lawyer told him what I already knew. "Everything is airtight. Your grandfather has every right. You burned a suitcase. He rewrote the deed." The words weren't meant for me, but when the lawyer repeated them later, I savored them. Because they carried the weight of law, weight my grandson could never lift. Tuesday, he went to my accountant. He thought money could be shifted, recoded, hidden. But the answer was the same, final, unshakable. Wednesday, he tried my neighbor, the man who once shared drinks with me on the porch, the man who had laughed a little too loudly when the suitcase burned. My grandson thought he could sway him, thought friendship could bend allegiance. But even he wouldn't take the call. Too many bridges torched, too many laughs at my expense. Thursday morning, a message arrived. Anonymous sender. But I knew. The tone gave him away. 3 words. "You win. Fine." But this was never about winning. Not for me. It was about the weight of things. The weight of pages, of stories, of silence carried for too long, of being dismissed, mocked, overlooked, until the only way to be heard was to become undeniable. The gallery was full, not of strangers, of family, old neighbors who still remembered when I used to mow my lawn in the heat of July. 2 former colleagues from the university, men who had argued with me in faculty lounges about grading rubrics and tenure reviews, now gray and softened with age. Even the local librarian came, the one who had quietly slipped me extra time on interlibrary loans when I was researching obscure history texts. They were all there, and they thought it was a celebration. The invitation had been plain, black letters on ivory cardstock, a legacy remembered, archive unveiling and family tribute. It sounded ceremonial, safe, even sweet. No one expected a confrontation, not even him. But he came anyway. He walked through those double doors in a dark suit, too expensive for someone who'd recently been locked out of every financial vein he once fed from. The fabric looked pressed, but it fit him wrong. The confidence he usually wore with it was missing. His shoes still shined, polished to perfection, a habit he hadn't dropped. But his eyes were dulled, flat like glass with the light taken out of it. He came in late. The crowd shifted, heads turned, but he avoided their gazes. Sat at the edge of the room, the very last chair in the back row. Didn't greet anyone, didn't nod, didn't smile. Just sat there, staring ahead, waiting. For what? I wasn't sure. Maybe to be called out. Maybe to be acknowledged. Maybe just to be noticed again. The screen behind me flickered to life. Light spilled across the white canvas. I stepped onto the small stage. No podium, no barrier. Just me, a single mic, and the truth. I cleared my throat. Let the murmurs hush. "Thank you for coming," I began. My voice carried. "This isn't a eulogy. I'm still standing. This isn't a reading of the will. That part's done. This isn't even a story about fire. It's about what survived it." The murmurs quieted completely. Eyes fixed. Breath held. The first slide appeared. A scanned letter. Layla's. Her handwriting curled across the screen, uneven but elegant. And then her voice filled the room. Not mine. Heron. A reconstruction, pieced together from the recordings I'd kept, built carefully with the help of technology that could breathe sound back into silence. She spoke in soft, accented English. "My dearest Wallace, they will never know what you carried. But if you ever share it, make sure they listen." Gasps rippled through the rows. Some leaned forward. Some clasped hands tighter in their laps. And in the back? He blinked. Twice. Hard. The next slide appeared. A photo. My grandson. 7 years old. Laughing. Holding the old suitcase, wearing one of my neckties like a cape, grinning at the camera as if the world belonged to him. The room softened, smiles flickered, some chuckled quietly. And him? His throat tightened. His jaw shifted. But he didn't look away. Then came the receipts. Not financial ones. Emotional receipts. Proof of weight. Proof of presence. Letters from my students. Pages of gratitude scrawled in earnest handwriting. A recording from a refugee I once mentored. His voice cracked as he thanked me for helping him finish school, for teaching him English when no one else would. Photos of classrooms I had funded overseas. Desks lined with children. Chalkboards filled with possibility. And finally, the trust documents. Projected in full. Signed, stamped, transparent. So there would be no whispers after. No, maybe he exaggerated. No, maybe it wasn't legal. It was all there. Undeniable. When the lights came back on, The air felt heavier. I let the silence stretch before speaking. Legacy is not what you leave behind. It's what refuses to leave, even after you're gone. The words settled. I turned then, faced him, directly. He didn't flinch, didn't shift in his chair, but his jaw clenched. The skin near his temple pulsed. I could see the storm behind his stillness, and then I turned back to the audience, walked off the stage, took my seat, crossed my legs. The applause came, polite, warm, sustained, but not thunderous. This wasn't that kind of moment. It wasn't about entertainment. It was about truth. And truth doesn't roar. It hums. And it stays. He didn't clap. Didn't move. His hand stayed still, clasped between his knees, until the librarian stood. She wasn't a woman who commanded attention. But in that moment, she did. She walked straight to the back row, straight to him, and placed a pamphlet in my hand. "The memoir program you helped fund," she said, to me, but loud enough for him to hear. "It's starting next week. Several of your letters are going to print. The students wanted to meet you." She smiled warmly, then turned, glanced at him, and her smile cooled. Her voice softened, but carried sharp enough for him to feel it. To think, all that could have been lost. She walked away, leaving the words lodged between us like a blade. After the event, I walked slowly through the crowd. Faces leaned toward me. Hands reached for mine. One by one, people stopped me. They said thank you. They said, I didn't know. They said, this mattered. Every handshake, every eye contact was weight restored. And he? He lingered near the exit, not leaving, not stepping forward, just waiting, as if unsure whether to walk out or confess. When I finally reached him, he spoke first. "I didn't know you had so much. Saved." His voice was flat, honest. I met his eyes. "You never asked." A silence stretched between us, not empty, not hollow, heavy. A silence full of things unsaid, things he wanted to reclaim, but couldn't. He tried again. "Do you think there's still a place for me in that?" I paused, not out of cruelty, but because I wanted the weight to land, to let him feel every second of the gap between what he had destroyed and what he might one day rebuild. Finally, I answered. "Not in the story you tried to erase, but maybe in the one you're willing to help rebuild." His mouth parted, closed again. He nodded once, didn't smile, didn't argue, just nodded, and stepped aside. Let me walk past. That night, I lit a single candle, not for ritual, not for memory, just for clarity. Its flame flickered, small but steady, casting light across the room. And as I watched it burn, I reminded myself of one truth. Fires destroy, but light reveals. And the story I left behind? It would outlive the flame, because it had finally been seen, and because I had finally chosen to show it. If this story struck a chord, hit like, subscribe, and tell me what you think in the comments.